Gaming is dying, and remakes are killing it. It's been a long time since I've made a video like this. It feels like the video game industry has been dying so long, I've become completely apathetic to it. Basically, every franchise I cared about 10 years ago is either dead or some twisted, disgusting abomination barely resembling what it used to be. The AAA industry especially has become completely creatively bankrupt. You barely see any new IPs anymore, and when you do, it's obviously been cooked up in some DEI lab, specifically just to get funding from BlackRock. Concord obviously being the biggest example, one of the biggest flops in video game history, but also Dustborn, which released right around the same time, and Flintlock less than 6 months ago now, though I doubt any of you even remember what that game is. And so, because the industry can't produce any new ideas that actually make money, we are now living through the age of remakes, or more accurately, demakes. The corpses of all of your favorite games you grew up with are now being paraded around on twisted puppet strings. And we're supposed to look at this and just say nothing. We're supposed to be happy that more people can get to experience the great games we grew up with. Why would I be happy that my favorite game has been butchered by people who never touched the original and missed the fucking point? Why should I be happy that people who didn't even care enough to set up an emulator and download a ROM now will blindly blow $70 on a game they won't even finish since they didn't care enough to try it in the last 20 years and are further contributing to the death of the video game industry? I'm supposed to be happy about that, apparently. If you asked me to name 5 games that should never get remade, Silent Hill 2 undoubtedly would be one of them. Not because the game is aged perfectly. Obviously, it's a bit rough around the edges in certain ways, as a lot of PS2 titles are. But Silent Hill 2 is truly a piece of art. It is a game that you play for the story. Now, normally I am a gameplay is king guy, but it's obvious to anyone who's played the original game that the gameplay was in service to the story, not the other way around. And it's not like Silent Hill 2 is a movie game, no, it's still mostly gameplay. It's just that the complete survival horror game experience mainly served to immerse you in the hell that is Silent Hill. There's so many aspects of Silent Hill 2 I knew wouldn't translate well to a modern remake. The most obvious one being the surreal, dreamlike atmosphere, and it's obviously one of the biggest things that the remake butchered. The weird voice acting that was obviously done by inexperienced actors. The phenomenal soundtrack that enhanced every minute of the game. And I am not exaggerating. I truly believe Silent Hill 2 is one of the greatest OSTs of all time. And of course, it's just the nature of the story itself, of the people who are suffering in Silent Hill. Silent Hill 2 covers a lot of controversial subjects. When I heard Bloober Team would be essentially censoring things for the modern audience, this was the thing I worried about the most. And to make matters worse, a DEI consultancy group called Hit Detection, yes, Sweet Baby isn't the only one, worked on this game, and one of its writers, Jacob Geller, hates gamers and thinks the world would be a better place if we all died. Is it any wonder why Angela looks like Mulder from X-Files? And Maria has a giant fucking man jaw that puts James to shame. A YouTuber I used to watch years ago called The Gaming Brit Show recently made a video talking about how horrible this remake culture is, and the video is fantastic. Despite being only 6 minutes long, I think it pretty thoroughly covered the problem with modern game remakes. And I have to agree with every single point, especially the one about how video games are not treated as art. When movie remakes are announced, they are often met with disgust because you are taking someone's artistic vision and you are twisting it to try and fit it to modern audiences or just to make a quick buck, and they almost always suck anyway. But for some reason, when video game remakes get announced, people get excited. And who are these people? They're the fucking normies who can't stand to play any game more than 10 years old because they have bad graphics or janky controls, which are basically just a bunch of different ways of saying they hate uniqueness. They want every single fucking game to be The Last of Us, a cinematic, over-the-shoulder, third-person shooter with the same goddamn mechanics, because that's what the Silent Hill 2 remake is. At first I was thinking, oh, this was obviously inspired by the Resident Evil 2 remake, which it is, but realistically, it plays like The Last of Us. Fucking Silent Hill plays like an action cinematic slop game. And again, I'm supposed to say this is awesome because, oh, the combat was terrible in the original game. Yeah, because the combat wasn't the fucking point. All of you goddamn tourists who have never played a survival horror game, you don't play those games because the shooting is fun. It's resource management. And the tank controls are janky on purpose, is to make the player feel weak so that you're afraid. Past the 2-hour mark, I was never scared again in the Silent Hill 2 remake because you fight the same 3 goddamn enemy types for the entire fucking game. I killed almost 300 enemies in Silent Hill 2. There was one line in the Gaming Bridge Show video that perfectly encompassed my feelings about all these people who play these remakes and love them and then pretend to be fans.
Nobody who's seen the 1989 Little Mermaid cartoon would claim to have an understanding of the 1837 fairy tale. Yet today, remakes do seem to be sold as a way to catch up on something missed. So if you play SH2 Remake, don't kid yourself into thinking you've experienced Silent Hill 2. If that statement sounds at all offensive, I'm not sorry, because it's just a statement of fact.
As you can imagine, a lot of tourists were upset by this video. Some people even claiming that not everyone is tech savvy enough to work an emulator to play the original game. By no stretch of the imagination am I a tech wizard. All you have to do is watch my streams, and there's a very good chance you'll see some obvious tech issue that I wasn't aware of because I've never been a computer guy. I got Visual Boy Advance to work on my shitty laptop when I was 12 years old. And you're telling me grown-ass men and women can't spend 5 minutes learning how to use an emulator? Then the truth is, you just don't care, okay? So if you don't care about these games, about these franchises, why are you trying so hard to fit in? Why are you arguing with people who actually do care about these franchises? There's been a lot of gaslighting over the past 10 years about whether or not people were bullied for liking video games. Well, let me tell you, I absolutely was an outcast. Up until I was around 14 or 15 years old, nobody in my school talked about video games except for the nerds. And while I was certainly never shoved into any locker or whatever cliche 80s movie BS, I can tell you for a fact people didn't like me. And then by the time I graduated high school, everyone was playing video games. Of course, it was the generic normie slop like Call of Duty or Assassin's Creed, but the point still stands. The same people who thought I was a weirdo for talking about video games all the time now desperately want to be included in our club. And it's fucking pathetic. The sad fact of the matter is that we are vastly outnumbered and have been for about a decade at this point. All you have to do is take a look at any of my numerous hot take videos, which are me just giving my honest opinion. I think most modern AAA games are overrated by both critics and audiences alike, though I suspect a lot of that audience is simply following whatever their favorite e-celeb is telling them to think. Not to mention the untold amount of political activists that get upset every time I point out the propaganda people like them are putting in video games. Now, in spite of what I just said, although hardcore gamers are an extreme minority, it's obvious given all of the woke game bombs this year, especially Concord being the biggest example of all time, that normie gamers aren't tolerating progressive ideology shoved into video games, at least not when it's incredibly blatant and obvious. But for one reason or another, I don't know if it's just because these people aren't smart enough or they don't care to look for the signs or they just turned off the pattern recognition parts of their brain, they can't seem to notice when there is subliminal messaging or censorship. And I think this Silent Hill 2 remake is a perfect example of that. It's just close enough to the original that even fans of the game, I say fans in quote, the super fans obviously could dissect this to pieces, and I'm going to be doing a bit of that myself in this video. But to the casual fan who only ever played the game like one time 20 years ago, this seems like at least a semi-faithful remake, ugly women aside. And that's exactly the point of this remake, to be just close enough to the original that if you squint, it's like nothing changed except the gameplay. The truth is, this remake is not being made for the fans. It's being made for this new modern audience that doesn't exist, and for the normie casual gamer who never actually gave a fuck about the game, who probably watched a YouTube walkthrough like a decade ago, or listened to their favorite e-celeb talk about it and how much they loved it, and were excited to play it without all those icky, janky controls. There's this great meme passed around years ago that describes this situation perfectly. Earthbound fan excited to play the game for the first time. Now tell me that isn't the same fucking thing as this. Silent Hill 2 fan excited to play it for the first time. Because over the past 20 years, its story has been spoiled more than probably any other game except BioShock's. Everyone knows the twist. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of video essays that have been created on YouTube about Silent Hill 2. And now, these people who didn't actually give a fuck but remember the name and its amazing reputation are gonna sit down and play this butchered remake and think it's the greatest fucking thing ever. And I don't even know why I'm saying this as if it hasn't already happened. The overwhelmingly positive reviews on Steam, the shilling from whitelisted grifter YouTubers who just want to parrot whatever the public opinion is on something. It's obvious that all the people who bought and played this game, and even a shit ton who haven't and never will, have already decided this is a great remake, at least until they forget it ever came out a month from now. And look, as my rage began to subside a couple days after I first recorded this segment, I realized that I should make it clear that I don't think this is a bad game on any level. I never give games a numerical score in my reviews because it always brings up the debate on how exactly you should rate a game out of 10. Some people think it should be based on some nebulous idea of the average quality of a game released today. Meaning that a 5 out of 10 in 2024 is way worse than a 5 out of 10 in 2004, which I just personally think is idiotic. Me, I treat it more as a grading scale, right? So the average quality of a game is probably more likely between 6 and 7. And the reason I bring this up is because I do think that the Silent Hill 2 remake is definitely an above average quality game. It's probably one of the best games that's come out this year, but that doesn't matter. Silent Hill 2, the original one anyway, is one of the greatest games ever made. I would give it a 10 out of 10 based on what the game is trying to accomplish, aka tell a depressing story about a man who's so stricken with guilt that he basically erases his own memory and is drawn into Silent Hill, which is basically his personal purgatory or hell. And it's one of the few times I think the gameplay and the cutscenes work perfectly in tandem to enhance the experience. Whereas with this remake, a lot of the soul, the passion, the effort is lost, and it just kind of feels like any other cinematic slop game that you've played in the past 10 years. This doesn't feel like a unique experience anymore. I'll admit I didn't do the best job in the world describing why that is the case in the review section of this video, but there's some things that are just too hard to describe. You have to play the two versions back to back to see how a lot of the visual aesthetic style has been toned down and made much more generic, and it's hard to say if that's just a consequence of modern realistic graphics losing a lot of that beautiful early 3D era style that Zoomers and casual gamers who didn't grow up with them really seem to despise for some reason. I have a lot of nostalgia for PS1 and early PS2 graphics, and I think Silent Hill 2 absolutely made the most out of those limitations. However, again, I'm not going to praise the remake very much in this review, but I do think it is a perfectly competent game. The reason that there's so much rage in this video is because there are people seriously trying to claim that they played the original and think this is the better game. If you sincerely believe that, you were never a Silent Hill 2 fan. So yeah, if I was being completely honest, if this was ever pretending to be a fair review at any point, I'd probably give this a 7.5. But am I supposed to praise a remake that took a 10 out of 10 game and downgraded it to a 7.5 so that the masses could enjoy it? Hell no. This remake shouldn't even exist. But yeah, I just want to make it clear I don't think this is bad for those of you who think just because I dunk on this game the entire review, that means I think it's dog shit. No, it's not dog shit, but it is a demake. That's the point. And before I ramble on about this for another 15 minutes, let me just make one thing clear for all of you tourists from Reddit, Twitter, Discord, etc., etc. If you haven't played the original Silent Hill 2, your opinion doesn't fucking matter. Nothing you have to say about the story of Silent Hill 2 matters. So just save your retarded ass comment. Not that any of you idiots are even gonna watch this far in the video anyway. You just watched some clip that was spread around on Twitter and then write the gayest comment I've ever read in my life and think that's some kind of gotcha. Look, I know you're not watching the video. My fans know you're not watching the video. You're wasting your time. But thanks for the engagement, idiots. These remakes can never truly replace the original. As much as the powers that be would love this to be the new reality, it never will be. These people will never be Silent Hill fans. So first off, I am going to cover the supposed only benefit of this remake, the gameplay. Now, I know that I admitted that the gameplay is better in the intro, but I was being somewhat sarcastic because while, yes, a Last of Us clone is better than a classic survival horror game in terms of how fun the mechanics are to actually play the game, once again, I would argue the point of a survival horror game is not to have fun shooting things, it's to survive. That's where the fear factor comes from. And the ultimate problem that the Silent Hill 2 remake has is that there is way too much combat for how few enemies there are. And that's not just a problem of repetition, it's also a problem of fear or lack thereof. On normal difficulty, I died 0 times. Yes, 0 over the course of the entire game. And look, the original Silent Hill 2 on normal difficulty is also a fairly easy game. But I don't think it was so easy that I had 25 syringes, the equivalent of the original game being first aid kits, by the end. But people being disingenuous and saying that this remake is more difficult than the original just tells me that you are bad at video games. And when there is no challenge in the combat, because you can very easily adapt to the 3 enemy types that only have 1 variation each, so you can very quickly learn when to dodge each attack and then just beat every enemy to death with a fucking pipe. You basically don't even need your guns. Oh yeah, there's a sidestep. You know, that's what Silent Hill really fucking needed. A sidestep with invincibility frames. What is this, fucking Dark Souls? So if we're being really generous, it's 6 enemy types, plus a handful of bosses, and 2 enemy types that show up a few times near the end. And even then, you can ignore one of those enemy types completely. Like I said, I killed nearly 300 enemies by the end of the game. For frame of reference, I just played the original Silent Hill 2 on hard, and I only killed 81 enemies by the end of the game. The dungeons are twice as long as the original game each. My total playtime ended up being 14 hours, which, depending on how you count gameplay, that is well over twice as long as the original Silent Hill 2. And I don't necessarily hate that as long as it's quality content being added. As for the dungeons, I was okay with the increased length and the new puzzles and the different items that you had to collect in each one, because it is a reimagining after all. It's nice to do some new things instead of just the same thing again. But so much of that increased length is the combat. And again, you're fighting the same 3 enemy types. Well, okay, you might be wondering, how are the boss fights? Because they're completely redone. Well, I'll be completely honest with you, I'll say they're a mixed bag. Some are definitely improvements, namely the Eddie boss fight I think is much better. But some of the most important ones in the game have become so generic and soulless. Like the Flesh Lips boss turns into a mechanical spider for no reason. The Abstract Daddy has a prolonged chase sequence before the boss fight starts, which you could say is symbolism for what Angela's dad did to her, but it's still not very fun to actually play. And the final boss turns into another mechanical spider in its 3rd form. I mean, really? They didn't have any other ideas? In the case of both Pyramid Head fights, I think Bluebird Team did fine. They're more or less direct translations to how the original fights played out, just with better combat mechanics. Though there is a problem with the first fight, which we'll go into in the censorship section. I also feel like I have to bring up the Closer, which is an enemy type from Silent Hill 3 that they put into this remake for some reason. I'm not sure if they put this monster in here as a reference for fans or because they closely resemble the Mandarin enemy type, the ones that cling to the grates. But knowing that the monsters in Silent Hill 2 are supposed to represent aspects of James' psyche, the Closer obviously doesn't fit here given that Heather Mason is the one that fought these things. Again, I'm not too torn up about this. I thought the boss fight was okay, but it's certainly worth noting at the very least. So again, if you're somehow missing the point here, not only is there 3 times as much combat as the original game, but it becomes incredibly boring and repetitive before the halfway point. I don't know what the hell Bloober Team was thinking, turning Silent Hill 2 into Resident Evil, but let me just tell you, it absolutely takes away from the experience. I find it very funny how many people are praising this remake when one of the primary criticisms of Silent Hill Homecoming back in the day was that it had a much larger focus on combat in a game that's supposed to be about surreal horror and building up tension. You know what ruins tension more than anything? Fighting the same enemies every 5 minutes. Speaking of horror, let's talk about that a little bit. I think this remake is not scary in the least, and a big part of that is the combat aspect I just talked about, so I won't cover that again. But I also think there were a few deliberate choices made in this remake that definitely make the game less scary. The most obvious one being the over-the-shoulder camera. I know some people are just going to blatantly disagree with this, and at the end of the day, it just comes down to personal opinion, I guess. But I think there is something inherently scary about fixed camera angles. When you can't see directly in front of you and you know a monster is in the room, not just because of your radio, but the thing is making weird noises somewhere that you can't even see, that's scary. The closest this game comes to replicating something like that is hiding the mannequin enemies around every corner. After a certain point, it's just an annoyance more than anything else. As a joke, I was calling the mannequin enemies legs, and these fucking legs are my arch nemesis throughout the playthrough. Every time I'm just exploring around, gathering supplies, trying to figure out where to go, I'd get jumped out of nowhere over and over and over again. You can't do the same trick 20 times and expect it to still be scary. The lack of fixed cameras also makes several iconic shots from the original game completely ruined. I'm not going to go into autistic detail with this, but there is one obvious example that trumps the rest, an example that ruins the entire scene. At the end of the hospital, you'll remember that Pyramid Head chases you down a series of narrow hallways while Maria is following closely behind you. And this scene comes out of nowhere. There's basically no build up to it. It just kind of happens, and it's legitimately pretty scary the first time you play the game. In the remake, it turns into a generic cinematic slop sequence where Maria is in front of you instead of behind you. You can't even see Pyramid Head chase you, because why would you ever turn around? And because the hallways are so much larger, it removes the sense of claustrophobia, and there's a scripted part where Pyramid Head just Kool-Aid mans through the wall. It feels so fake. This is like the ultimate gameplay example of Bloober Team being fucking hacks. Anyone who defends this part has not played the original game, period. Now, a lot of the other elements that make this game less scary are subtle things, especially things that you wouldn't even notice if you haven't played the original a long time. A great example that some of you have probably already seen is the side-by-side comparison of the cutscene where you meet Maria inside of Toluca Prison. How the hell did they miss the point this hard? It is obvious that the harsh lighting covering up her eyes is on purpose to make this scene creepy. You know something is wrong, especially since, spoiler, you saw her die to Pyramid Head in the hospital, and yet look, she's right here. The new scene isn't creepy at all, and part of that is due to the voice acting as well, which we'll get to later. And another thing I almost don't even want to talk about because it is borderline heartbreaking, and I am not being hyperbolic here. I legitimately do not understand why they did this, is how they butchered the original soundtrack. And they didn't screw it up in the way you think, because Akira Yamaoka came back for this remake. So the music itself is still awesome. A lot of the tracks are reused, some of them are arranged, and when there's actual music playing, most of the time it's great. Now, over the course of editing this, I did notice that there's actually quite a few rooms in the original Silent Hill 2 that have no background music, and the remake isn't quite as quiet as I remembered while I was playing it, but at the same time, I think the lack of soundtrack is used in all of the wrong places. Like I said, I'm not going to go into autistic detail on this, and you're free to disagree with me. But even when they're playing some of the creepy tracks from the original, the background music is just quieter. And I had all of the volume sliders maxed out, so I guess the only way to fix this yourself is to lower the volume of everything else and then crank it up with a mixer, or if you have speakers attached to your computer or something. It's just a roundabout way of saying that the volume mixing is kind of bad in this game. I feel like if the horror soundtrack was such an integral part of the experience, why did they make the music more quiet in the remake? And there's some other examples I could name of the game just being generally less scary or surreal or nightmarish in nature, like the mannequins moaning like a woman, and it's not even distorted, by the way. Yes, the enemies of Silent Hill 2 made noises when you hit them, but it still sounded like a monster. I feel like I've already said this like 3 times this video, but I'm not going to go into any more unnecessary detail on this. If for some reason you've played the original and you somehow think the remake is just as scary, good for you. I don't believe you, I really don't, but I guess that's just your opinion. Now let's move on to something that's less subjective. Let's talk about censorship, because there's been a hell of a lot of gaslighting going on over the past week. A lot of people claiming that nothing has been censored when that is just objectively false. So we're just going to start off with the best example of this, the cutscene right before the first Pyramid Head battle. There's also 2 notable pieces of censorship around Maria's character. The first being when she bends over to pick a lock. In the original, James clearly stares at her ass, which I'm going to argue is actually a defining character moment for him. James Sunderland is not a good person. And look, I'll just say spoilers again, even though I'm assuming everyone here has played this game or at least already been spoiled on the story. He killed his wife. But oh no, it's problematic. He stares at a woman's ass. We can't let anybody see that. People might spurg out. The monsters in Silent Hill 2 are sexual for a reason. They represent parts of his psyche. James is basically a coomer. So yes, him staring at Maria's ass is an important character moment that they removed. Now let's talk about a gameplay element that they censored. You can't hurt Maria anymore. I don't know how the hell all the people who claim to have played the original game forgot about this one, but yes, you can actually hurt and kill Maria, and it gives you a game over in the original Silent Hill 2. Now, I get the feeling that the defense for this is going to be, oh, I thought everyone hated escort missions. Here's the thing, you only defend Maria for about 20 to 30 minutes of gameplay in the original, and there's a very low chance for dying outside of the Pyramid Head chase on hard difficulty, which is absolutely infuriating, by the way. I can vouch for that since I just played the game on hard for this review. The devs obviously didn't test that part on hard mode, but that's besides the point. In every other part of the game, Maria has pretty much a 0% chance of dying, but the fact that you can kill her makes the game feel a lot more interactive, and is sort of a red herring to lead you away from the possibility that she is completely fake, like she doesn't actually exist. Clearly, at the very least, James believes that she is a real person, not cooked up by the town of Silent Hill. But no, it's problematic to let gamers kill women unless they're badass and brave female enemies in a Ubisoft game or something. And of course, the elephant in the room, talking about Maria, is her costume. It's obviously less sexual than the original, and they even show off the original costume when you visit a motel, as if to mock players of the original game.
Hey, you think I'd look good in this one?
Sure.
Not quite the ringing endorsement, but hey, I'll take it.
Once again missing the point that Maria is effectively a succubus. And man, I don't know if this qualifies as censorship or not, but speaking of elephants in the room, we have to talk about the ugly women in this game. Oh boy, this is always my favorite topic because it causes such a knee-jerk reaction in a certain group of people that are not biologically female, let's put it at that. Yes, the women were blatantly made more ugly in this game on purpose. Angela is the most obvious example. She had the biggest character assassination in this game next to Eddie, and I think a big part of that is genuinely making her look like a man. Everyone who's seen the new version of the mirror scene, you know that's a fucking man, dude. Just look at that face. That is not an ugly woman. That is an adult male. And look, obviously I was being incredibly immature during the streams. You may have seen a clip making a reference to our boy Sargon back in the day.
Go ahead. Say it. Or you could just force me. Like he always did.
Bitch, don't flatter yourself, please. I wouldn't even you. But jokes aside, it genuinely does take away from her struggle, the fact that they made her so hideous. And you can think I'm a bad person or incredibly mean to say, even though this is a fucking fictional character, not a real person, Twitter, you mentally ill freaks. But the halo effect is absolutely real. If this character is hideous, and she didn't used to be hideous in the original game, she was just an average-looking woman, then I'm obviously going to be less sympathetic toward the character. And to get into something that is debatably censorship, they actually altered the boss arena from the original game. Now, you could certainly say this is the least subtle symbolism in all of Silent Hill 2. The holes in the wall and the pistons pushing in and out of them. Gee, I wonder what that's supposed to mean. But in the remake, the room is so fucking dark. Actually, the whole game is like pitch black. That's a whole other complaint I'm not going to spend a lot of time on. But let's just say the remake is pitch black for no reason, and no, it doesn't make the game more scary. It just meant I was wasting way more time just looking around since I couldn't see shit. Not only is this room way too dark for no reason, so you can't even tell the walls are supposed to be fleshy, maybe symbolizing the inside of a woman's orifice, but also the holes in the walls don't have pistons pumping through them. Why exactly? I have no idea. And once again, keeping on the topic of Angela, I have to talk about her final scene on the burning staircase. This is where I feel that Angela's character assassination is the most blatant. Part of it is due to the voice acting. Despite all of the complaints, once again, from non-fans of the horrible voice acting from the original game, which is 100% intentional, by the way, now the voice acting either sounds way too normal or average, or again, in the case of Angela, it's actually worse than the original. Her new voice is fucking horrible.
Oh, it's you.
Yeah, I'm James.
Angela. You're the same as me. It's easier just to run. Besides, is what we deserve.
No, I'm not like you.
Are you afraid? I'm sorry.
Oh. It's you.
Yeah. I'm James.
Angela. Maybe it's all we deserve.
Mangela.
We.
Me. You. We're all the same.
I'm not like you.
Are you afraid?
Yeah, I'm afraid you're gonna touch me.
Sorry.
She sounds like she's constantly on Xanax or something, where the original Angela was obviously unhinged. Now, it was justified given what happened to her, but she clearly has a screw loose, and nowhere is that more apparent than her final scene. James even recoils, the camera changes to first person, and James steps back as she desperately tries to cling on to him and unload all of her burdens.
Thank you for saving me. But I wish you hadn't. Even Mama said it. I deserved what happened.
No, Angela, that's wrong.
No, don't pity me. I'm not worth it. Or maybe you think you can save me. Will you love me? Take care of me? Heal all my pain? That's what I thought.
Even Mama said it. I deserve what happened.
No, Angela, that is not true.
Don't pity me. I'm not worth it.
Only true thing she said this year.
Or maybe you think you can save me? Will you love me? Care for me?
Again, like, the scene is ruined because they
Feel
made
all
her,
my pain?
like, so busted.
That's what I thought.
Again, I think it's obvious to anybody watching this that they fucked up the tone of this 100%. And look, as schizo as I get in these videos sometimes, I really can't say for certain if this is censorship to make her more sympathetic, but it honestly had the opposite effect. It just made this way more forgettable, and at the end of it, I just felt nothing. All I could do is tell edgy jokes to the stream. I feel like that's this whole remake in a nutshell. It really just doesn't make you feel. I'm not ashamed to say that the first time I played Silent Hill 2, I cried. I really did. It is a perfect game to play if you've ever been depressed at any point in your life. But this remake is truly soulless in the way that it tells the story. Goddamn, dude, mark my words, just like I said in the intro, everyone's gonna forget about this remake in a month. Okay, let's move on to Eddie. He was the other most butchered character in this remake. In the original game, Eddie was a pathetic and somewhat sympathetic fat idiot.
Huh, you're just a gutless fatso.
He killed someone's dog and then shot the guy in the leg, and that guilt was enough for him to get drawn into Silent Hill. Why? Because he's a coward and a loser. That was basically his character. You were supposed to feel bad for him.
This town is full of monsters. How can you sit there and eat pizza?
She said she was fine by herself. She said a fatso like me would just slow her down.
Now in the remake, he is a deranged psychopath.
A person ain't no big deal. Just put the gun to their head. Pow.
You killed him?
But it wasn't my fault. He made me do it. Besides, he was making fun of me with his eyes, like that other one.
Just for that, you killed him?
What do you mean, just for that?
Eddie, you can't just kill someone because of the way they looked at you.
Oh yeah? Why not? Till now I always let people walk all over me. Just like that stupid dog. He had it coming too.
Eddie?
I was just joking, James. He was dead when I got here, honest. Just put the gun to their head and pow.
Eddie?
Oh, hi, James.
What happened here? Who was that?
I don't know. It just came at me. The way he looked at me, I just had to do it. He kept looking at me, making fun of me. And I told him not to, but he didn't listen.
Eddie, you can't just kill someone because of the way they looked at you.
They ruined the tone of Eddie so fucking much. It's unreal, man. And again, if your pattern recognition is going off, the blonde-haired, blue-eyed character is no longer sympathetic and acts like a psycho. Gee, I wonder if there's any political motivation to make the most blatantly white guy look bad. But again, this is one of those things that if you haven't played the original in 20 years, or never at all, you would never know. But as someone who just played them back to back, it is incredibly blatant. Now, there's also other stuff I could bring up, like Mary's voice acting is definitely worse. This is incredibly apparent in the final hallway before the final boss, and when she reads the letter at the end.
Please don't go. Stay with me. Don't leave me alone. I didn't mean what I said. Please, James. Tell me I'll be okay. Tell me I'm not going to die. Help me. Please. Don't go. Don't leave me alone. I didn't mean what I said. Please. Tell me I'll be okay. Tell me I'm not gonna die. Help me. I can't tell you to remember me. But I can't bear for you to forget me. These last few years since I became ill, I am so sorry for what I did to you, did to us. You've given me so much, and I haven't been able to return a single thing. That's why I want you to live for yourself now. Do what's best for you, James. James, you made me happy. I told the nurse to give this to you after I'm gone. Which means that as you're reading this, I'm already dead. But that's okay. I'm not afraid of it anymore. I just hope the pain will end soon. so that you remember me for who I was, and not what the disease made me. I want you to go on. I want you to live. For yourself and for others. Like you did for me. James, you made me happy.
But again, do you think the average person is going to care about this? They're never going to verify it for themselves. Again, because they can't play a game that's more than 10 years old. At most, they'll watch an all cutscenes video on YouTube. And for my final character complaints, let's talk about James Sunderland himself. While I think he's probably the closest to the original character out of all the main cast, except Laura, I guess, at the same time, the devil is in the details. I feel like he's simultaneously too emotional and not emotional enough where it matters. James certainly had some of the worst voice acting in the original game, but you could argue that it gave him a sort of detached feel, because deep down, he knows exactly what happened to his wife, and he's repressing it, right? He thinks he's a good person. He would never kill a human being, right?
I killed a human being. A human being.
But deep down, he is a bad person, and rather realistically, this is only portrayed in very subtle ways in the original game. Like I said, he stares at Maria's ass. He doesn't seem overly concerned that there is a child running around in this town full of monsters. There's probably other examples you could name. The point is, he's kind of dissociated from the whole experience. And it's sort of up to interpretation how much of that is intentional versus just the bad voice acting. Now, the new version of James not only is a lot more emotional, a lot more concerned about what's happening, isn't sleazy in the least bit, but also due to perhaps the modern graphics, he just conveys emotions much more strongly on his face. He acts a lot more like what a good person would do in this situation. But he's not supposed to be a good person, that's the point. It's actually hard to believe in the remake that he even killed his wife in the first place. Outside of more directly insulting Eddie in the new theater scene, yes, they replaced the bowling alley with a theater for no reason. It doesn't change the scene in any meaningful way except make it really weird that they're not actually watching a movie on the screen. I don't know if the intention here was that Laura and Eddie can see a movie, but James can't because of the way Silent Hill fucks with people's heads. I don't really know. Either way, the bowling alley is still in the game. There's just no scene in it. Either way, I think you can see where I'm going with this. They made James a much more bland character than he was in the original, and it definitely hurts the story. The story is literally about him, yet he has pretty much no defining character traits in the remake, especially since such a large part of the game is supposed to be around the sexual part of his brain. It's why all the monsters are feminine in nature. It's why Maria is effectively a succubus, because it's supposed to be Silent Hill creating the ideal form of Mary. But if you remove any hints to him being a Coomer, then the story doesn't even make sense anymore. But again, I feel like people are gonna say I'm clutching at straws, man, but sometimes you just gotta play the games for yourself, and you'll see exactly what I mean. Then again, I don't think you should play this remake at all. It doesn't even matter that you can argue, oh, it's like a 7 or a 7.5 out of 10. The original is one of the greatest games ever made. And unlike the Resident Evil 4 remake, there is no reason to play this over the original game. It does not stand on its own, and you played Silent Hill 2 for the story anyway. At least with Resident Evil 4 Remake, I could have a unique spin on a gameplay style I was already familiar with and loved, even if that game was definitely inferior to the original as well. Bloober Team's Silent Hill 2 Remake is considerably less scary than the original game. It has far more padding and worse pacing than the original game. Despite the combat mechanics being better, you fight the same 3 enemy types for like 95% of the game, which on its own reduces the fear factor, increases the repetition, ruins the pacing and the tension, and there's 3 times as many enemies as the original game as well. So for everyone shilling that this has way more fun gameplay than the original, I know for a fact you didn't finish it. On top of all of that, the story has been ruined by worse direction, especially way worse lighting in the cutscenes, worse voice acting on multiple key characters. The character models are hideous on the women specifically, and Eddie is even fatter for some reason. And of course, there's also censorship, and last but certainly not least, the game is just way too quiet. One of the greatest OSTs of all time is woefully underused for no real reason. Need I name more examples? I think I summed up the downgrades pretty well. So obviously, no, you shouldn't buy this game, and it looks like the sales weren't that impressive anyway. 12,000 peak players is really not that good, especially since the Resident Evil 2 Remake had something like 60,000, and the Resident Evil 4 Remake had over 100,000 people playing it on launch day. Fuck these soulless cash grabs, and if you're excited for the Metal Gear Solid 3 Remake after this, then you're exactly the type of sucker that Konami wants as their audience. They don't want to even make any new games. They just want to create these soulless cash grabs for a new generation so that they don't actually have to create any new art, and they can quietly censor any problematic moments from those original games, effectively rewriting history. Because they know none of you guys who play these remakes are going to go back and play the original. If you are a true fan of one of these franchises, do not buy these remakes in the hope that, oh, they're going to make new games again. They're going to botch those games anyway if this is what they do to the remakes. You need to stop being a fanboy and start being an enjoyer, or whatever you want to call it. You shouldn't be a pay piggy for $1 billion corporation just because you've attached your emotional worth to a franchise you grew up with. That's just fucking sad. I love Silent Hill 2. It's one of my favorite games of all time. I think the first 3 Silent Hill games are all great, all worth playing, and I've been playing some of the 4th one recently, and even that one is pretty good and certainly is worth a try at the very least. It's fairly unique compared to the other games. But that doesn't mean I want Silent Hill to come back from the dead, because I know Konami will screw it up. The way I see it, the only way to save the video game industry at this point is to just boycott every single video game that has the slightest shred of DEI or ESG in it. I don't care how extreme that sounds to the mentally ill that watch these videos just to spurg out, dislike, and write an asinine comment. And I also don't care about the opinions of the casual gamers who don't even know what the fucking term woke means and have completely turned off the pattern recognition part of their brain and will just buy up whatever their favorite e-celeb tells them to. So I look forward to the totally organic comments on this video from Silent Hill 2 fans who have never played the game, telling me how I'm wrong without naming any of the specific points I made in this video. I honestly don't think you should waste your time responding to these people. I'm honestly not even convinced they are people. But once again, if you are one of those people from Reddit, Twitter, or Discord, thanks for the engagement, losers. Remake culture is gay. See you next time, guys.